Speaking le tau tu kara ibu join
Hello. Ajit
नहीं देखिए रोमाना, मैंने ये खबर जो है ट्विटर पर एक वरिष्ठ महिला पत्रकार है, उन्होंने ट्वीट की थी ये खबर। उसके बाद से ये सिलसिला शुरू हुआ है और उस पर जिस तरह की
अनम्यूट कर दो वाले कौशल ने हमारा बच्चे चल। I think now I can speak, बराबर? I think we can start with them. Good evening, all the members. Extremely sorry, there was some technical error and everything, so just we have to pass by 10 minutes. We all know that we've lost almost 10 minutes. We won't waste much time. May I request now Ajit Bhai, please to introduce our speaker. Today we have Kushal Shah. He'll be taking on internal audit and risk assessment. It was a long-awaited topic we wanted to introduce.
Good afternoon, Anand. CA Kushal is having a more than 20 years global and prospective and executive experience of internal audit, risk management, corporate governance, and business consultancy. He has an experience of working in 6 different countries, including Australia, UK, China, New Zealand, and Oman. So he has a very vast experience in all the fields. He has also worked with three of the big 4 firms, and is also non-executive director at Australia large public hospital. Over and above this, he has also obtained a degree of MBA from Melbourne Business School in the year 2016. Today, we are lucky to have such a person as a faculty. With this, I request Kushal to start with your lecture. Kushal.
Thank you, Ajit Bhai, for your kind words, and thank you to the CA Association, Ahmedabad's President Anand Bhai, to the Executive Committee and the Professional Development Committee and the rest of the association for organizing this webinar. And also thank you to my fellow professional colleagues to log in to this webinar, which may be a dry subject to some of you. As Ajit Bhai said, I spent 17 years in 5 different countries honing my skills, and now it's great to be back in Ahmedabad. Whilst I was in Australia, I really enjoyed the life over there and embraced the culture over there, the way of life, except when the Indian cricket team was in town. I had my fair share of brickbats from my Australian colleagues and clients about the Indian team's poor performance over the years, but thank goodness I had the last laugh in the 2018-19 series when we won, and I finally got a chance to give it back to them, of course, with a friendly laugh. Now, let me start with a bit of a trivia, considering that we are in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic. Today, on 9th of May in 1873 was when the Vienna Stock Exchange crashed, and that was the start of the Great Depression in Europe and USA. It is called the Long Depression in USA, and depending on the region, its effects lasted for a couple of decades. It was the first known economic turmoil in modern times, though we all tend to remember the Great Depression of the 1930s, which was much more severe, but it did have its roots in the previous depression. So today, after exactly 147 years, we are standing at the cusp of something similar. So let's keep our fingers and toes crossed that an economic depression does not eventuate. So, thinking of the current times, there has been an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, as you can see in the chart. And this is reported by Google. So, based on the search interest of this word on their search engine, as you can see, it has shot through the roof. Anyway, let's talk about better things like internal audit and risk management, and how can these services be the pathway for us to becoming trusted advisors in these unprecedented times. So what's the agenda for today? We want to look at what is internal audit actually what's its evolution looking like, what are the key processes within the internal audit, and what are the key elements in there that can add value. Let's talk about the current attributes for success in internal audit. Also, we need to consider certain areas that will add value to internal audit in the current times. And I'll end with some case studies to actually share some real life examples of how internal audit has actually added value. And then I'll conclude with some key takeaways that you can take back with you. In today's world, which is less predictable than ever, and with the pandemic crisis hitting the entire world with the high potential of forever altering our world economy, living standards and lifestyle as we know it, the internal audit function needs to be nimble and think proactively. So what does internal audit typically look like? So when you think of internal audit, what do you envision? Something like this? Does this inspire visions that internal audit will assist its clients navigate the risks of the future, when traditionally it has evaluated and assessed historical data and processes to provide assurance to its stakeholders? However, there is no doubt internal audit has done a fantastic job in providing assurance to the executive management and the audit committee, and it is taken very seriously by its stakeholders. For example, when we say we'll do a deep dive, we leave no stone unturned, or as in this cartoon, no depth untouched to come up with our findings. Internal audit has definitely created a very credible base. So what is internal audit? Let's have a quick look at the definition of internal audit by various bodies. As per ICAI, internal audit provides independent assurance on effectiveness of internal controls, risk management processes, and contributes to enhancing the governance. As per the Cost and Works Accountants body, internal audit is an independent and objective appraisal service within an organization, and it does provide independent and objective opinion to the CEO, CFO. And as per ACCA, internal audit is the independent and objective evaluation of an organization's internal controls. So what is clearly evident in these definitions is the focus on providing assurance. That comes out very clearly. So what does internal audit involve? Sometimes internal audit can mean a lot of things. It can get a bit overwhelming, like this diagram. It can mean legal matters, it can mean reputational matters, it can mean strategic issues, it can mean regulations, it can mean assessment, oversight, number of things. But essentially, it is simply about defining the objectives it is trying to achieve, what testing procedures will it apply and document to achieve its objectives, and how will it communicate with its clients and stakeholders about the outcomes of its objectives. So why is internal audit required? Over and above the assurance it provides to the stakeholders and adds value, there is obviously a regulatory requirement angle to it. We all know about the Companies Act 2013 and how it requires certain class of companies to appoint an internal auditor. There's also stock exchanges around the world that mandate the creation and maintenance of a robust internal audit function. For example, New York Stock Exchange's listed company manual requires each listed company to have an internal audit function. Also regulators, for example, the UK Financial Reporting Council in its corporate governance code mentions that the audit committee needs to monitor and review the effectiveness of a company's internal audit function. And in the annual report, it needs to say whether there is an internal audit function, and if it does not, it needs to provide an explanation for its absence and how internal assurance is achieved. So implicitly, there's a number of requirements surrounding internal audit functions. There's also requirements around internal financial controls and risk management systems that the board needs to comment on, which would obviously require the services of internal audit. But internal audit needs to be able to expect the unexpected and manage the strategic, operational, regulatory, and financial risks that continue to shift on a nearly daily basis. But currently, internal audit is seen more like this, especially from an executive management and line management's perspective. So how do we move away from this perception? And how do we add real value to our clients that is appreciated and that is valued by them? Like this hypothetical Jack in this cartoon, where he's being appreciated by his clients. But internal audit has traditionally focused on providing assurance through evaluating correctness and completeness of recorded information, accounting related controls, and proprietary aspects like delegation of authority and signature on expenses and vouchers, existence of key documents like MOUs, etc. It has focused on historical data and on providing assurance that processes and controls complied with the internal policies and regulatory requirements. The key here is that it focused on historical data. But internal audit has come a long way since. The Institute of Internal Auditors define internal audit as an independent, objective, assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operations. It's important to see the distinction between assurance services and consulting services in this definition. So what does the Institute of Internal Auditors mean by assurance services? Excuse me. It talks about an objective examination of evidence for the purpose of providing an independent assessment of governance, risk, and control processes. At the same time, from a consulting perspective, it says it is advisory and related client service activities, the nature and scope of which are agreed with the client, which are intended to add value and improve an organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. So the emphasis is on adding value and improving organizations' processes and governance structures. So it is very clear that the view here is that it is not enough to just evaluate an organization's governance, risk, and control processes, but also to look at adding value and to improving the same. So what does an evolved view of internal audit look like? In adapting to the changing technological landscape and also the more and more complex business environment, it is important that internal audit expand from its traditional controls focus, which is in the bottom left-hand quadrant of the diagram. So while internal audit continues to preserve value by testing internal controls relating to financial reporting and adhering to compliance and capital market regulations, it will also need to offer strategic and consultative advice to drive the business. In addition, the internal audit will need to participate in value creation, which is in the top right-hand side quadrant, by overseeing finance transformations, assisting with mergers, acquisitions, post-mergers activities, strategic sourcing, and even operational enhancements, while enabling technology to sustain the changes. This is especially true in today's uncertain times when organizations are looking for strategic and commercial insights. So what does internal audit of today and the future look like? In this triangle diagram, you'll see the range of alternatives for internal audit to focus on, which should evolve as the organization evolves. In new and rapidly changing environments, stakeholders may want to ensure that fundamental controls, which is the bottom of the triangle, are effective while internal audit's primary role is. But as the organization matures and as complexity increases, there may be less need to focus on these areas other than ensuring that operational management retains control. In these situations, internal audit should look up the value chain and identify opportunities for operational improvement and deliver long-term strategic value. The right answer to internal audit's focus should be a direct reflection of an organization's maturity. Internal audit is very well placed to balance this, as it already has a seat at the table and access to the decision makers. Internal audit is now playing a much more prominent role in the organizational issues like major capital projects, major changes to information systems, and material contracts and procurement contracts. So what does the mandate for internal audit look like? Based on its evolution over the years, it is very clear that internal audit has the mandate to balance the audit committee and executive management's expectations with the organizational and business needs and initiatives. As this diagram shows, we need to move up the value chain from the base of the spectrum, being a control and compliance monitoring service provider, to having the skills and ability to provide real business insights, and then eventually rising to the top of the spectrum by becoming a strategic and valued advisor. It should be noted that none of these roles are at the expense of the other. It is important to balance between assurance and advisory activities and not let either one of them slip by skewing too much on the other side. It should also be noted that this push for internal audit to expand into advisory and consulting and assurance services is also coming from the stakeholders. After all these years of providing robust assurance services, assurance is assumed by all the stakeholders. On top of providing assurance, stakeholders are also asking for insights and advice. Of course, there are skeptics among the stakeholders that internal audit may not have this competency. But it all depends on how we are able to deliver on this expectation and how we're able to upskill ourselves. So it is clear that internal audit has the mandate to expand beyond its traditional role and add value. So now let's look at some of the key elements in the internal audit process that can be used to deliver on this expanded mandate. Here is a high-level process map of internal audit activity, starting with the development of the internal audit plan and strategy, scoping of individual engagements, executing fieldwork, developing and finalizing reports, ensuring quality, and also ensuring continuous improvement and communication. I won't dwell much on this as this will be familiar to most of you, but instead let me highlight key elements in each of these processes that we should apply so that internal audits can add value. The most important thing in the development of the internal audit plan is the alignment with the organizational strategy, and whether it is focused on the risks that matter to the organization, and whether does it have a total assurance map in place to ensure that there are no gaps from an assurance perspective. Now let me quickly talk about each one of them. To add value and maximize relevance to the organization, internal audit needs to have a line of sight and solid understanding of the organization's broader business strategy, imperatives, and drivers. For example, it needs to understand and fully appreciate what is the growth strategy of the organization, what's the branding strategy, what is the market entry strategy, what is the product strategy, what is the operation strategy, and how does that differ from this organization to other organizations in the same industry and also to other industries, just to provide that level of context. Elements of the organization strategy will of course vary by industry and will be very specific to each organization. Such understanding of the organization's business strategy also helps in identifying risks that may stop the organization in implementing its strategy or achieving its stated goals. To provide tailored solutions and recommendations for future improvement, understanding this organizational context is very important. So let's quickly talk about what is risk and what is risk management and what is risk assessment. Now, whilst risk management is a technical subject and a whole profession on its own, which I can talk about for hours, here I will only cover risk management to the extent it is relevant to internal audit planning. So risk is the level of uncertainty in achieving objectives and goals, whereas risk management is the identification, evaluation, prioritization, and treatment of risks through 4 mechanisms, which is mitigation, minimization, acceptance, or transfer. Transfer, as you all know, it is transferring the risk to someone else, more commonly through insurance mechanisms. Let's take the example of Wimbledon. Since 2003, since the outbreak of SARS pandemic, they have taken a pandemic insurance, a specific pandemic insurance, which to their benefit this year they were able to encash because they received a huge payout because they had to cancel the Wimbledon tournament as a result of pandemic. So what is the common problem with risk? Risk is in the eye of the beholder. It is very subjective. It is determined by people's perceptions, which could be very different. It is determined by individual appetite, which again could be very different compared to risk taking ability. Everyone's view on risk and the value it provides is again very different depending on the downside and the upside. And as I said, it is very subjective. But risk has to be managed based on balancing the risk and benefits, which are usually influenced by individuals, project teams, stakeholders, organizational structure, and also the intended benefits. So all of this needs to be taken into consideration. Hence, a risk management framework is required to drive a culture of informed risk taking. Please note, risk management is not about not taking risk. It is about taking informed risks. Using data where possible to remove differing perception and subjectivity around risk is a very common method of keeping it objective. But most importantly, from an internal audit perspective, it is really important to focus on risks that really matter and not on all exposures. So let's talk about risk universe. Building on from the understanding of the organizational strategy and business imperatives, internal audit needs to build a risk universe of all the types of risks that can negatively impact its organizational strategy and business imperative. These risks should be assessed, analyzed, evaluated, and treatment plans agreed, taking into consideration the control environment, which influences the likelihood and consequences of those risks. This exercise should always be done in collaboration with the key stakeholders. This risk assessment and treatment plans are not only an important input into internal audit planning, but also for risk management. Again, I'll use an example of this risk management technique applied by the City of Melbourne, which is the Municipal Corporation of Melbourne. Back in 2015 or probably 2014, it had identified pandemic as a risk within its risk universe. Straight away, in 2015, it recruited a chief resilience officer to combat this risk. And the risk was mainly around the municipal corporation not being able to provide services, impacts to public health, and also impacts to economic progress due to a pandemic. So the chief resilience officer joined the organization and minutely analyzed this risk and put in place detailed plans to combat it if and when a pandemic eventuates. Now, during the current Covid-19 times, Melbourne is one of the safest cities in the world because of their proactive risk management practices. Whilst this process can be a bit subjective as it relies on individuals' perceptions, it can be made more objective and data-driven by applying data analytics. Now, analytics provide better information on risks via the application of both exploratory and predictive techniques, as well as through the automation of routines that speed up the evaluation of risks. This ability to focus on more complex and significant risks helps internal audit identify and evaluate not just the current, but also the emerging risks more quickly, and it provides them with information that can be used to raise and report risks, to influence decision makers, but also to include them in the internal audit plans coverage. Such analytics also provide an opportunity for internal audit to move away from what I call episodic static internal audit plans to more dynamic internal audit planning, utilizing continuous monitoring and predictive modeling approaches. So as and when there is a change in the risk profile, the internal audit plan can be altered to either provide assurance or assist in providing improved mitigations. Also, it is important to understand and appreciate the individual risk appetite of key stakeholders, as this will have a bearing on the nature and type of decisions they take. Risk management is all about providing fit for purpose and objective information to support informed decision making. One of the ways I approach to understand the individual risk appetite of stakeholders is by asking them what brings them to work every day, rather than by asking them what keeps them awake at night. Because by asking them that question, I can have a detailed understanding of what are their motivations, their emotional cues, their psychological cues. And also I feel asking a question about what keeps you awake at night has a bit of a negative connotation. Next one is the total assurance mapping. To develop a total assurance map, we'll consider all sources and levels of assurance currently received and map it to the key risks to provide a holistic view of whether the level of assurance obtained is adequate to manage the key risks and identify gaps. The total assurance map proves to be a very useful tool for executive management and the audit committee to manage risks avoid duplication of efforts from different sources of assurance, and save costs. It also helps the audit committee in discharging their overall responsibilities of risk oversight. Assurance sources may be either internal, which is management or oversight or internal reviews, or it could be external, obtained from third-party providers such as internal audit or statutory audit or specialist consultants. Now, in this diagram, shows the relationship between risk and assurance and how the level of risk can be reduced in direct proportion to the level of assurance obtained. The length of the line between the residual risk and the level of assurance implies the robustness and coverage of the assurance framework. I've also provided an example of the total assurance table which supports such an assurance map. The internal audit plan should have a long-term time horizon and should be aligned with the organizational overall strategy, business imperatives, and risk profile, as mentioned. Now, as seen in this diagram, the top right-hand quadrant in dark blue is where the internal audit plan is optimized, and in turn, it optimizes the value it provides to the organization. This is because it is strategically aligned and also it is risk-based. Similarly, the internal audit plan should not focus majorly only on financial areas like it has in the past, but it should have an appropriate blend of coverage between compliance areas, operational areas, technological areas, and strategic areas. It should also have an appropriate blend about the type of internal audit activity between among advisory, assurance, thematic audits, or even issue-based audits. Now let's quickly talk about scoping. During scoping, make sure to invest as much time as possible in planning for the audit. Spend most time in understanding the area under audit, who are the key people, what policies and procedures are implemented here, any key past events, what are the future plans for this area. Also review background documentation if you can, like past audit reports, team meeting minutes, reporting to senior management from this area, risk registers, etc. Also try and understand if there are any concerns the stakeholders have for this area under audit. Historically, this has been an area where internal audit hasn't really focused on, but it is one of the most important areas to ensure productive outcomes for both internal audit and the stakeholders. It also sets the context under which this internal audit is undertaken. Make sure the internal auditor agrees the overall objectives of the internal audit and also clarifies if it is an assurance, advisory, or a mixed engagement. This is important to ensure the internal auditor can focus accordingly. Another important aspect is to explicitly clarify and agree scope exclusions. Scope exclusions should never be open-ended, which are left to the interpretation of the user, as that can lead to misinterpretation of what is in and out of the scope between the internal auditor and the client. It is also important to limit the liability of the internal auditor by clearly clarifying what the scope exclusions are. From a fieldwork perspective, employing data analytics helps in assessing the full population for anomalies or trends rather than undertaking sample testing. Audit techniques even today rely on sampling data that resides in enterprise systems, thereby providing the capability for static, retrospective, and limited view of exceptions, control breakdowns, or risks. In today's world, where huge volume of data is available, it is important to have the capability to dive deeper in the organizational data sets to capture the full population and all relevant facts for analysis, and not rely on samples that might not accurately reflect the underlying risks. A number of tools are available in the market to help you analyze this huge amount of data. Data analytics can also be employed for continuous auditing. So internal audit serves as a real-time monitor to detect controls or other issues. In addition to the technical skills, what is really important during fieldwork are the soft skills of the internal auditor to authentically connect and engage with the client. It is up to the internal auditor to break the defensive barriers of the client and provide confidence to them that they are here to assist and not just to find faults. And even if there are faults, they will work with the client to find the deep root cause rather than play the blame game. This level of emotional quotient and soft skills is really important for the productive outcome of the internal audit. Other soft skills required are appropriate interviewing skills, so that the internal auditor is asking open-ended questions and is able to recognize cues from the answers provided. Similarly, internal audit needs to continuously interact with the client and keep them informed, not just on the status and progress of the internal audit, but also on the significant findings or issues noted. It is not advisable to wait till the end of the audit, as no one likes such surprises, and it may be seen as blindsiding the management. It also builds trust with the client through such continuous communication. You can appreciate how important are soft skills in the operation of internal audit through these. Also, it's important before the fieldwork ends to have confirmed the findings and issues with the client personnel involved in the area under audit to ensure its accuracy and that no information is missed out. Remember, there should never be any agreement with client management on facts, as otherwise it raises questions on the credibility of the internal auditor. And no one likes surprises during the reporting phase. From a reporting perspective, I'm a big fan of the two questions, why and so what. So for any finding or issue noted, by answering the why and the so what question and taking it to its logical end, the internal auditor is able to identify the root cause of the finding and the real problem, and also the real impact of the problem. By being clear on this, coming up with a sustainable and practical solution, and even an out-of-the-box solution, is much easier rather than coming up with a band-aid solution, which will not help. As Albert Einstein says, if I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. I'm also a big fan of something I call the recommendations filter. It is very important to provide recommendations that are pragmatic, sustainable, and tailored to the context of the client. Because at the end of the day, your recommendations is what the client will remember and nothing else. Once the internal auditor has determined the root cause of the problem, using the recommendation filter would help in coming up with an appropriate recommendation. The filter asks two key questions. One is on the impact. Will it make a difference either in the operations, controls, risks, culture, or performance of the organization? And second is from a probability of success perspective. Can the organization do it? Do they have the capacity and capability to implement the recommendation successfully? The ideal recommendation is the one where the impact and the probability of success is high, as in the top right-hand quadrant. If there is a low response to both the questions, then a decision needs to be made on whether to invest in improving the impact and or the probability of success, or whether other recommendations should be pursued. It is also worthwhile to workshop and collaborate with client to come up with practical solutions. This will ensure buy-in from management on the agreed solution, as they would feel empowered considering that they were part of the problem-solving exercise. The worst thing an internal auditor can do is to impose their recommendations on management without consulting them. I would also like to add that the internal audit report needs to be balanced by mentioning the positives, mentioning the areas for improvement, of course, and also providing insights on the overall area under review. Most of the times, internal auditors adopt an exception-based report format, which may be okay for line management, but does not provide the full picture to executive management and the audit committee. Internal auditors may have multiple levels of quality review and peer reviews and very competent staff too. But nothing is more important to ensuring quality than receiving continuous feedback from the client. This helps in understanding the expectations of the client, whether they are changing, and allows the internal audit to pivot their approach and services accordingly. But first, it is important to set up and agree the performance measures that will be tracked. Such performance measures must be well-rounded and cover all aspects of the service provided, and also the various means of tracking them. Then, the frequency and method to measure the performance must be agreed with the client. Client feedback can also be obtained in the form of formal feedback mechanisms, like a simple performance survey, which could be electronic, or through informal means where a partner of the firm, not part of the internal audit team, can gather client feedback on a periodic basis to ascertain the overall performance. I must say this is an area many internal auditors miss out on. It is important for internal auditors to be open to constructive feedback and set an example for continuous improvement and change. So in this evolved world of internal audit, which has a much bigger mandate than what it used to previously have, what are the attributes of internal auditors? What are the changing attributes of an internal auditor? First one is all around soft skills. Now, due to the changing focus of internal audit and the changing demands and expectations of the stakeholders, a number of soft skills have now become actual hard skills for internal auditors. And the need is now for well-rounded professionals. Internal audit is no longer the domain of traditional accounting and financial controls professionals. Soft skills like resilience, mainly to withstand client pressure and pushback, analytical and problem-solving skills, communication skills, strategic mindset, ability to learn quickly, and the urge to constantly learn have become very important. That is why internal audit practices around the world are bringing in engineers, data scientists, army personnel, psychologists, PhDs, scientists, human resource personnel, operations personnel, etc., and are not limiting themselves to traditional accounting skills within their teams, which of course will continue to be required. Next one is about human psychology. Now, gone are the days when you could be an introvert and sit behind a desk and audit using a predetermined audit checklist or an audit program. Internal auditors need to be comfortable with people. They need to be authentic around them. They need to have strong relationship building skills. I always believe that the evolved form of internal audit is a branch of human psychology. Well, okay, maybe a faraway branch, but you get my gist. I always try and understand, as I mentioned earlier, to understand the people behind the process and the people behind the organization. Again, using the same analogy of asking the question of what brings them to work rather than asking them the question of what keeps them awake at night is a very good, helpful tool to have insight into their emotional and psychological triggers. To become a trusted advisor, this is an inherent skill and expertise expected of internal auditors. The third one is industry understanding, knowledge, and commercial acumen. Now, clients value industry understanding, knowledge, and commercial acumen much more than functional and technical knowledge. This is mainly because this allows internal audit to be able to understand the context of the organization, identify problems accordingly, and come up with tailored and commercial solutions rather than generic and off-the-shelf solutions, which may not be applicable to that organization or even to that industry. Now, let's talk about internal audit areas that we should consider in current times, which are quite unprecedented, as we all know. The first one is about understanding the digital enterprise of our clients. Now, as you can see from the diagram, most organizations will have some or all of these interrelated digital presence and assets in use, and an integrated digital presence which will only get bigger and denser in post-COVID times. It will be very important to advise our clients on the potential risks of such a digital enterprise and its likely solutions. Does our client understand where is their data in the cloud? How do their employees, customers, and vendors access it? Do they understand what tools are accessing their data through mobile means? Can they keep up with the changing devices? Are they prepared for cyber attacks, which is obviously a buzzword these days? But it's very important. And most importantly, from a convergence perspective, do they understand how all the digital technologies interact and what are the risks around them? Now, digital transformation cannot progress without strong digital and data governance in place, and every internal audit function should be involved in that process. Internal audit should provide a point of view on the level of governance and can expand its risk coverage by helping shape digital governance frameworks if the organization doesn't have one. The next area to consider is around business planning and forecasting. Again, in this digital age and in the COVID-19 era, traditional business planning and forecasting methods will not work. Forecasting will have to be fundamentally different, using, for example, artificial intelligence. It will have to be predictive in nature. It will have to leverage internal and external data. It will have to determine which data signals will be relevant, and also which business drivers and processes do they map. Internal audit can help with this fundamental shift by looking at the analytics capability, the data access and availability, and whether the right correlations can be drawn, and also whether the new ways of forecasting can reasonably predict and estimate what is going to happen. And finally, internal audit should also check whether is it going to be integrated, whether the new way of forecasting is going to be integrated with business planning, which is quite important. Next one is around BCP and crisis management. Internal audit can review the BCP and crisis management plans to ascertain if they are based on sound understanding of what matters to the business and what the business depends on. This is important because there's a lot of generic audit programs on BCP and crisis management, but the most important element of that is, has the organization tailored their BCP and crisis management plans based on what is important to them? Internal audit can also check if they clearly articulate this, if the BCP and crisis management plans clearly articulate designated roles, plans for communication and coordination, decision-making protocols, emergency action plans, and identify if they need any updates. The focus needs to be on whether the plan works rather than does it exist. Looking to see if the plan exists is a tick the box exercise and provides false assurance during these times. So now is not the time to merely report deficiencies, but it's time to help ensure the plans are fit for purpose and adequate. Data management. As the volume and velocity of data increases, the potential risks and exposures for organizations are also significantly rising. Internal audit can provide an assurance role in testing the effectiveness of the controls to address information and data security risks. But internal audit can also provide advisory services by assisting in developing a data security framework, preparing training programs and material, and also help spread awareness. This one is quite important, cost-cutting measures and workplace changes. Now, most organizations will be exposed to new and unknown risks, mainly due to two reasons. One is because of cost-cutting measures that all businesses would either have implemented by now or will be implementing very soon. And number two, current disruptions to normal office environment where everyone is working from home or is working from a significantly altered office environment. Now, due to these two reasons, normal controls that were usually in place may no longer be applicable or would be compromised, giving rise to these new and unknown risks. In such a situation, internal auditors should assess and advise the organization on such exposures and potential fixes. Also, it is important for internal audit to advise the clients on their immediate risks, beyond immediate risks, and also about the long-term implications. Other than the risks that I've already spoken about above, it is important to think about immediate risks relating to business operations which may be transferred to different locations. Is there effective two-way communication with staff? Potential disruptions in off-site data storage services, impacts to customer buying behaviors, or whether the organization's ability to provide customers with technical service will be disrupted. Now, the impact of COVID-19 on operations and the overall economy could potentially last for months or even years. So you should be looking at how an extended disruption could affect supply chains, productivity, business growth projections, cash flows, profit expectations, and more. You should also be thinking about how organizations can manage post-pandemic scenarios, such as quickly ramping up production to respond to pent-up demand. It is well documented that businesses that open first after a natural disaster are often the ones that fare the best in the long run. Let's quickly talk about some real-life case studies to see how internal audit can add real value. The first one is around risk assessment. So during one of my first experiences in risk assessment and risk management, I had prepared a risk-based internal audit plan for one of the largest private hospital groups in Asia Pacific. When I presented that to the audit committee, I was politely told by them that the plan did not meet their assurance needs. They did not expand on that and did not give me more information. When I reviewed the plan a number of times to identify what went wrong, I realized that the plan was skewed to the financial risks of the organization without fully taking into consideration other service delivery and clinical risks that a private hospital group would face. I had also not taken into consideration the organizational objectives of the client. Now, as the center of the universe for a hospital group is its patients. To address this gap, I devised a patient centricity model. Now, this model provides a sound framework to identify, analyze, and rate risks and align it with the organizational objectives. The risk universe from the patient centricity model included all attributes that would have an impact on patient continuity and service standards. The model showed the likelihood and impact of risks on patients, either directly if it was through a service delivery function, or indirectly if it was through the operational support function. This was used to bring out the key strategic risk profiles for the organization, which were evaluated, prioritized, and used as an input to determine the internal audit coverage. The new internal audit plan after the implementation of the patient centricity model was a completely different coverage of internal audit compared to the previous internal audit plan. And obviously the audit committee did accept the plan. Data analytics. A procurement internal audit was being conducted on a large hotel belonging to one of the largest 5-star hotel chain in the world. Now, this was an assurance review to check if the group procurement policies were being complied with or not. Straightforward. The procurement spend for the period was in the tens of crores of rupees, and the number of transactions were in the tens of thousands. So you can imagine the huge amount of data that was in place. Now, with such a huge data set, data analytics was applied to the full population to identify anomalies or discrepancies with the group policies. But to add value from an advisory angle, data analytics was applied whereby a detailed spend profile was developed to identify and provide insights on where revenue was being leaked and where there was room for efficiency and significant cost savings. This internal audit, by combining both the assurance and advisory services, provided significant value in terms of information on where, and more importantly, why non-compliances were occurring and how significant savings could be achieved. The third one is around the root cause analysis. Now, I was doing an internal audit on the project management office of one of the largest multinational conglomerates. Their project management office spent about $100 million a year on various projects, which is a significant amount of money just to spend on projects. But the executive management and the audit committee wasn't convinced that the project management office was doing a good job of managing projects, especially because the return of investment on those $100 was minus 3%. And of course, it wasn't acceptable to management and audit committee. So an internal audit was instituted to identify what is going on and how can that be changed. On undertaking the audit by picking a few key projects of different size and different complexities, it was pretty evident that they were consistently running beyond budget, they were consistently running beyond schedule. The projects in the end also did not meet the intended benefits or objectives of why the project was put into place, and a number of issues around that. So it would have been very easy to say, look, the project management office doesn't have the right expertise, doesn't have the right people, doesn't have the right tools, and as a result, all these problems are in place. However, it is important to go back to the why question and the so what question that I had mentioned back in the reporting times. It is important to push that question to its logical conclusion and understand, is that really the problem or is there something else? And when that question was applied consistently, it was pretty clear that the problem was not with the project management office, which was well staffed and had all the right resources and tools and systems in place. It was actually in the kind of projects that they were running. The process that the corporate finance team, which was a central team, applied to actually identify which projects to invest in was the problem, because they were not investing in projects which were aligned to the organizational strategy, but also they were not investing in projects which they had real expertise in. So the problem lied in the kind of projects that were being implemented rather than the process of implementing the projects. And when this was highlighted to management and audit committee, it became very clear that the corporate finance team did not have a foolproof mechanism to actually prioritize between the various projects that they get requested for funding. So as part of the recommendations, I had prepared a prioritization framework for the corporate finance team to actually implement and objectively prioritize the various projects that they'll invest in without any subjective issues in there. As a result, in the following year, when they applied that methodology and applied that framework, it became pretty evident that the projects were being run appropriately, and immediately in 1 year's time, from a -3% return on investment changed to a 5% return on investment, which again is quite low, but it was actually an 8% improvement from previous years. Okay, in conclusion, some key takeaways. I've already spoken about analytics. Analytics can evolve the internal audit processes from episodic to more forward-looking, dynamic, and continuous reviews that can provide real insights based on facts and numbers. Now, we all know data analytics is a current buzzword, but what is important to remember is that data analytics is not a technology. It is a concept. It refers to the use of certain technologies, skill sets, processes for the exploration, evaluation, and investigation of business operations. It provides hindsight, insight, and foresight. Can't get better than that. Internal audit can enhance the value delivered by driving down costs while expanding audit coverage and improving the focus on risks. Win-win. Audit efficiency can also dramatically be improved. Overall, it provides, as I said, hindsight, insight, and foresight. It is also important to remember that internal audit is actually a change agent. Now, many organizations are stuck in their comfort zone or are very complacent. Many organizations are also not agile enough to change, though they may want to change. In such situations, internal audit is perfectly placed to highlight the need for change and also assist in the change management process. Internal audit's independence, objectivity, credibility, and relationship with the audit committee and executive management enables it to drive the change agenda. It is a change catalyst. Next one is growth engine. This is more internal. In its evolved form, internal audit has an envious position to have a helicopter view of the whole organization, understand its overall risks and problems, and also has strong relationships with the board and executive management. Now, using this unique position, I've always seen internal audit as a growth engine for the firm, as it can bring other parts of the firm to the organization to deal with its problems. I call it the one firm approach. Through internal audit, the rest of the firm or other specialties or expertise of the firm can be applied to deal with the problems of the organization. For example, if the organization is facing significant environmental issues, now internal audit cannot or should not deal with that problem because they may not have the environment expertise. But if there is an environmental expert within the firm, or maybe from outside the firm, it should bring them to the client so that on one hand, the client problems can be addressed, but at the same time, it can bring the rest of the firm to the organization. I've spoken about the why and the so what. I can't continually re-emphasize the importance of these two questions because this will help you identify the real problem. Asking these questions to its logical end are integral to providing practical, sustainable, and long-lasting solutions to the client's problems and issues. Such solutions is the clear-cut sign of value addition in your services. As they say, proof is in the pudding, which is the recommendation in our case. Curiosity. This is quite important. Now, remember what Albert Einstein said. I am not overly intelligent. I am passionately curious. It is important to cultivate a beginner's mindset. It is important to be inquisitive, ask questions, because in the beginner's mind, the possibilities are endless. And in the expert's mind, the possibilities are few. This is very important for internal auditors to be able to identify the real problem and come up with out-of-the-box solutions to their clients' problems. And remember, curiosity may have killed the cat, but it never killed the internal auditor. Handbrake to happiness. Internal audit has a certain degree of negative perception about it, mainly due to its traditional assurance role, rightly or wrongly. It's up for debate. Even risk management profession suffers from the same perception. I call it the handbrake to happiness phenomenon, where we are viewed from that prism. And to an extent, we as internal auditors have been a bit slow in reacting to this reality and have not been very proactive to changing this perception. So we need to challenge ourselves to move away from being the handbrake to happiness and instead become the enablers of growth by thinking of ways of adding robust and sustainable value to our clients' organizations, by putting ourselves in the shoes of our clients and thinking of their problems as our own problems and coming up with practical solutions which will really address the problem. Similarly, risk management professionals need to change the negative narrative and start focusing on the upside of risk, which is the opportunity. At the end of the day, the onus is on us. And the last key takeaway is around developing your emotional quotient and soft skills. It's all about the human behavioral psychology. As you can see from the trust equation, which most of you might be aware of, the 4 variables that make up the trustworthiness in the trust equation have their roots in emotional quotient or soft skills. No wonder technical skills have taken a back seat in the importance of upskilling internal auditors. Overall, some might see the plunge in markets, the incessant news coverage, and social media obsession with COVID-19 as an overreaction. And some may even be put off by that. But even if the pandemic is contained and the economic impacts are temporary and mild, this outbreak actually offers an opportunity to all businesses and even to us to examine our capabilities, strengthen our plans to manage any significant crisis, and most importantly, helps position internal audit as a trusted partner and advisor. And as I said, the onus is on us. I'll finish with this picture. In current times, it has such a powerful message. Instead of saying, we are closed, this restaurant has written, we will be back, which is such a subtle message of resilience and positivity. This is what we need in current times, and internal audit is well placed to provide positive and resilient assistance in these unprecedented times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaushal. Now, it was indeed a great session, and may I now request Prakash Bhai to please.
Yes, Anand. It is my proud privilege to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of PD Committee of CA Association to Kushal for accepting our invitation and describing the topic in great detail. He has made so hard work to make this dry topic as interesting one. I also thank all the participants for joining this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.